Frederick Francis has been living in a single-room occupancy for the past 17 years. Single-room occupancy hotels, or SROs, whose tenants are mostly poor and single, are disappearing in the city. A few of those left are in the Uptown neighborhood.
I know I'm gonna miss this place because it helped me. I wasn't being pressured in any way. I wasn't being disturbed or nothing. I was very more secure. Anything I need, I'd say to Jane, everything took care of.
The Aragon Arms is one of the last standing SROs in Uptown. Eric Rubenstein has been the owner since 1984. He fears that the move to get rid of them in Uptown will leave his tenants with no place to live.
The city has to confront the fact that there are poor. The Bible talks about that the poor were around thousands of years ago. For folks to pretend that they don't exist is silly.
Rubenstein says not many like working with and living next to the poor, but he finds the business challenging and rewarding.
Because SROs are very tough to manage. They're very management intensive. Not many folk like to work with the destitute, the poor who would live in these properties because they can be difficult to manage, to keep under a control, so to speak, where they are doing what they're supposed to and being in harmony with their neighbors and so forth.
I remember I was on the third floor and this lady was misbehaving, and I come and tell them they was out. And this guy come inside here to live too, and he was trying to sell drugs, and he knocked on my door, and I come and tell the office he was out.
Alderman James Kappelman represents the Uptown neighborhood. He says the lack of affordable housing is a crisis in Chicago because it only exists in a few wards across the city. Kappelman wants more wards to stand up and fight for more affordable housing.
Other wards need to step up, and they haven't, because people don't like having someone living in poverty next to them. But once you do, and I have across the street, they're my neighbors. I mean, it's just, I put my pants on the same way they do. It's not a big deal.
The 46th Ward, which includes Uptown, is one of the most economically diverse wards in the city, with extreme wealth, extreme poverty, and everything in between. Uptown has some of the most government-subsidized housing in the city. Community organizer Vivian Tsao of One North Side, a nonprofit that organizes neighborhoods for equality, worries about what will happen to the government housing in 10 to 30 years when the contracts are up.
We're seeing a lot of buildings getting bought up in general, being turned into luxury apartments, high-rises. It seems to be a market to buy for developers. And
the most recent battle among community members was the teardown of the old Cuneo Hospital at Montrose and Clarendon. Now, 2 towers are going up, providing 630 apartments, with less than 5% classified as affordable housing.
It was a wide sort of esplanade sidewalks, and there were commercial buildings.
Melanie Ecker is an active community member and resident who has studied the Uptown neighborhood extensively. She says the old Cuneo Hospital site, formerly the Maryville Academy, had a truly unique and progressive architecture.
It's been sort of history that's off the radar. The site is often called Maryville, which was its last incarnation. It was a shelter for children after the hospital closed in 1988.
One Northside's goal is to make sure all voices are heard during the decision-making process when possible.
Too often, developments are plopped into the neighborhood without really any questions of, well, what would you want to build here? Or how would this look to you? What jobs do you think the neighborhood needs? Those questions are not asked. We're just told.
The developers who need a zoning change are required to go through the 46th Ward Zoning and Development Committee. Alderman Kappelman says more development will actually make Uptown more affordable.
If we don't have more apartments, then our vacancy rate stays very low, and the lower the vacancy rate, it drives up the rents. So I need more apartments here.
Uptown has always been a culturally diverse community. It has been the city's port of entry for refugees and immigrants, a place where more than 90 different languages are spoken, But with the new developments come higher property values and new neighbors who tend to be wealthier, college educated, and typically white.
Going to Chicago. Tell me a story.
The Green Mill Cocktail Lounge is one of the oldest bars in Chicago, dating back to 1910 during the Prohibition. Al Capone, the most infamous gangster in American history, was one of the famous Green Mill regulars. Dave Gemolo has owned it for the past 30 years.
Well, you'd sit at that booth over there is what I was told. You know, you'd sit there, that way you could see both doors. And supposedly no one was allowed to come in or out when he was here. And he tipped real good. He was like a really nice guy, you know.
After World War II, the number of destitute and poor increased.
It was rough, and the guys shooting heroin in the booths, and I'd find all the syringes were in the, they'd hide them in the frames and then reuse them. You know, I mean, it was the roughest joint in the world, but I loved it because it's...
John Holden, the former president of the Uptown Historical Society, visited Uptown as a kid.
I had a number of classmates who were from the Uptown area. They were typically Central and South American students and those of Asian backgrounds, including many Japanese students. So I would come around this community in the 1970s, and it was an adventure for a teenager for sure.
A proposal for 197 units on the corner of Broadway and Wilson is in the works, which could potentially put out many of these small businesses. Another development is being proposed for an 8-story building with 147 units on the southeast corner of Wilson and Sheridan.
The developments will impact the residential and retail character of Uptown.
The other piece that I think is a concern for people is that it's not just about affordable housing, it's about affordable commercial. Many people have been able to start businesses here or have businesses here because the overhead was low, and a lot of people don't talk about affordable commercial, but that can radically change the look of an area and also the things that are there that are interesting to people.
Much of the Uptown community welcomes the new and wants to keep the old. The goal is to unify and maintain its diversity while preserving its colorful history.
You have more poor being moved, if you will, or forced into areas that they didn't used to have to live in, but they have fewer economic options.
The number of low-income residents living in Uptown subsidized and unsubsidized housing stays for now. But what about the future?
If an effort was made by city elected officials, or even in the county, even the state, who truly wanted to help the poor and not just give lip service saying we ought to do something, and then when provided opportunities to do something, they don't want to be involved, and in fact will discourage you. It would take a monumental effort, as I see it, to get true commitments from elected officials, because so much has to happen from there.
We do not know what will happen to us tomorrow. Life is unpredictable. And you find yourself in a bond, and you can get displaced, you can pay a small rent, save, build yourself up,